Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast with your host, Guy Costin. The goal of this podcast is to give listeners a unique look into sales strategies from top industry executives. We introduce you to the heads of sales and heads of distribution who will help you understand the inner workings of the successful sales organizations from philosophy to execution. This podcast is essential for sales professionals seeking wisdom from the best in the field. If you're not familiar with Dakota and their Dakota Rainmaker content, please check out dakota.com to learn more about their services.
This episode is brought to you by Dakota Marketplace. Are you tired of constantly jumping between multiple databases and channels to find the right investment opportunities? Introducing Dakota Marketplace, the comprehensive institutional and intermediary database built by fundraisers for fundraisers. With Dakota Marketplace, you'll have access to all channels and asset classes in one place, saving you time and streamlining your fundraising process. Say goodbye to the frustration of searching through multiple databases, websites, Form ADVs, and say hello to a seamless and efficient fundraising experience. Sign up now and see the difference Dakota Marketplace can make for you. Visit dakota.com/Dakota-Marketplace today.
Hello and welcome everyone to Rainmaker Podcast. We are here in studio with Shane Clifford of Carlyle. My name is Dan DiDomenico. We are thrilled to have you down here today. Shane is the Managing Director, Partner, Head of Global Wealth at Carlyle. These conversations have been phenomenal for our listeners to hear directly from leaders in our industry. And this podcast promises to be another great one. Shane, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Dan. Delighted to spend some time with you today.
Shane Clifford is a Managing Director, Partner, and Head of Global Wealth at Carlyle. He is based in New York. He is also a member of Carlyle's Leadership Committee. He has over 20 years of industry experience leading business development and strategy for large alternative assets and financial services firms. Prior to joining Carlyle, he was a senior managing director at Franklin Templeton, where he was responsible for the global growth strategy and business development for their suite of alternative offerings. Previously, Mr. Clifford held several senior leadership and business development positions at Legg Mason subsidiaries, including global head of corporate strategy at Entrust Permal, as well as global head of business development at Permal Group, where he built and managed the global business development team, including sales, investor relations, client service, and marketing. He began his career at Merrill Lynch before working for BlackRock in the US, UK, Middle East, and Latin America. Mr. Clifford is a graduate of the University of Limerick, Ireland, and holds an MBA from the Boston University Graduate School of Management. So, Shane, we were talking a little bit beforehand and just talking about your path to Carlyle. I found it to be very interesting. Maybe you can share a little bit with us your background and what that path has been to Carlyle.
Yeah, so I would say I'm probably one of the more unique folks you'll talk to in the sense that I'm not your standard person in this business. I was born and raised in Limerick, Ireland. I got this idea in my head that while I was in college in Ireland, that I wanted to work on Wall Street. Of course, we now know that that's all condos today, but back in the day when Wall Street was a real thing. And I came over in 98, 22, right out of undergrad. I was incredibly fortunate, perhaps throughout my career at different points where various folks gave me a chance. And my career really got going at Merrill Lynch in the late 90s. And that's where I had the opportunity to really cut my teeth and begin to understand this business. I was out in the market educating financial advisors in the Merrill channel on various new products that were coming out to the field. So back in the day when 529 college savings plans were new, all that kind of stuff. And it was a fantastic experience. It was a great learning curve, a steep learning curve. And I quickly transitioned over to the asset management side of the business at Milim. Woke up one day and I was a BlackRock employee. So the first 10 years of my life were kind of Milim, BlackRock. Fantastic time, loved it. I then pivoted. The latter half of my time at BlackRock, I got really into the alternative side of it and really got interested and saw what was happening. This was, kind of 06, 07 is when I really started to think about that as where I really wanted to spend my time. And at that point, I made the move to Permal. which was a hedge fund business owned by Legg Mason. Had a fantastic 10 years there, both on the institutional and on the wealth side of the business. And then pivoted over to Franklin Templeton to help with their alts distribution effort. And most recently have joined Carlyle a little over a year ago now.
Yeah, I mean, Carlyle doesn't need much of an introduction. One of the iconic firms in private equity, private credit, globally.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what the vision is now at Carlyle. You joined a little over a year ago. Just talk through what are some of those growth initiatives right now at Carlyle.
Yeah, I think if Harvey Schwartz, our CEO, were here, he would tell you that there's 3 primary areas of focus today for us as a publicly traded company. Those are insurance, credit, and wealth. Mm-hmm. And specifically, I've got to worry about the wealth business, so we'll talk about that. I would say that Carlyle's had a large, healthy wealth business since the early 2000s. On any given year, 10 to 15% of gross sales have been in the wealth channel. That being said, traditionally it was in a closed-end effort, so where we would episodically come and go from various platforms globally and raise money on behalf of our institutional fund offerings in the wealth channel. Today, we're pivoting in a significant way towards these evergreen perpetual vehicles, and we're in market with several of those now. And it's a different track that we're on today than perhaps in the past.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit beforehand as well, before we got here on the desk, and just talking about your approach now to building out those efforts. It is a very different animal in terms of the fundraising, going from an episodic raise to now being perpetually in the market with evergreen funds. Talk a little bit about the early days of developing that strategy and how you are structuring your team.
Yeah, I would say to my friends and colleagues on the traditional side that look at the alts business and kind of trying to figure out, how could they do more in it. I lean a lot on my years on the traditional asset management side in terms of kind of lessons learned, because I think a lot of that is applicable to private markets firms like Carlyle today, as we try to really ramp our efforts here on the wealth side. So I have a global mandate, so it's complicated in that regard. So outside of the US, the structure is slightly different. So the folks there are really, those teams are utility teams. So they're doing a combination of what we'd call here in the US, origination or national accounts type home office coverage, but they're also out there doing the education, the marketing, and the wholesaling. Yeah. So they're kind of a Swiss Army knife approach, shall we say, if you're out in Southeast Asia, Japan, Australia, Middle East, and EMEA and LATAM. And then here in the US, I've taken a much more kind of traditional route in terms of structure, both with national accounts folks, marketing, product, and of course a large and robust sales effort.
So this is a big endeavor.
Yeah.
Big focus of the firm. Global mandate.
Yeah, you're getting me worried now, Dan. Should I be worried? You're ramping up for something here.
How do you manage the communication amongst your team? I'm sure you all have set out a plan, a sales plan. Yeah. Now, how are you keeping up with the communication from the teams to know if you're on point and on progress?
Yeah, so I might be a little old school in this regard, in that I spend a lot of time out on the road traveling with folks. And I think as a general rule, people have to get off Zoom and get back out on the road. I think Zoom and Teams has become a little bit of a crutch for all of us. It's fantastic. It's efficient. It's a great way on a Friday to get 20, 30 folks from your team on a call and kind of hit on 5 things that you'd like to remind folks before they get into the weekend. But I find that nothing beats that in-person time with the folks. So I spend a lot of time out there. For those folks that follow me on LinkedIn, I'm constantly on the road. Tough on the home front when you do a lot of that, but I think it's the only way. As you build a new culture and build a new team environment, you've got to do that. That being said, we do of course have formal weekly calls, bi-weekly calls of various shapes and sizes, and we have email communications as well as a relatively robust but still growing CRM system today.
Yeah, and I want to get into the CRM because again we were talking about that and some of the complications that are presented just given again the global mandate that you have and the team that you have on a global basis. Before we get there though, measuring success, there's the obvious in raising capital for the funds and obviously the growth in assets. But before that, there's a lot that goes into it. How do you think about the measurement of success and progress with your team?
So look, you've got the quantitative side, which as you said is relatively straightforward. For a national account team, it's like, okay, get these funds up on these 6 platforms over the course of the year and you'll have had a fantastic year, right? And similarly for folks on the sales side in terms of raise X amount for us and we're going to be happy with your efforts in that regard. Qualitatively, I think you have to really spend more time figuring out what it is that motivates people. And I think what I have done is I've tried to curate the kind of the qualitative side for each specific team member. So versus it being generic, that everyone has very specific things known on kind of how I'm trying to develop them within the team. So where I know they have a weakness, I'm going to make that a qualitative goal for them for the year, because you're trying to as well kind of bring them along on this journey and kind of develop them in specifically perhaps my direct reports on the leadership side. So I'm trying to empower the team a lot more than perhaps in the past. And I'm also trying to give them, I suppose, that little bit of rope and see how it ends up at the end of the day. But it isn't a cookie cutter, one size fits all approach. I would say that.
I love that. And I can tell that you must draw those conclusions around what motivates people. You're getting to know them by being there in person with them. The fact that you are traveling, and I'm going to start following you on LinkedIn now because I do want to see some of your posts around the world and where you are. But I'm sure that's how you're getting to know what it is those qualitative factors are that are either going to drive the individual or at the same time, what is it that you should be thinking about in terms of how they're executing within their role, absent of the clear, more quantitative results that we all track and measure.
Yeah, and I think, look, in this business, just in general, we silo things, right? We talk about the professional aspect of someone's life, and we don't talk about the personal. The reality is people have one life. And we as an industry or corporate culture has forced us to just talk about the professional side. But when I'm talking with someone and they're asking, for advice, career advice or something, or just kind of how could I be doing better at the firm, I need to understand their motivations in general in life. What do they want to do on the home front as well as on the work front? And I think that helps inform then my decisions in terms of kind of how I want to motivate that person, because I have a better understanding for them and ultimately their life goals, not just their professional goals.
Yeah. Well, you're humanizing it. And
right.
You're bringing that personal connection to it. To your point, I think we can get so caught up in the day-to-day in our world of fundraising, and we lose sometimes that perspective about what else is going on in somebody's life. And that can be very demotivating if you look at it more from that siloed approach. So the fact that you are bringing that all together, that's a fantastic approach, and appreciate you sharing that. Getting into that last topic that we were going to touch on, the CRM, and how it is, again, having teams around the world with some issues around the segmentation and different regulations that may go into each of those various local or regional markets. How do you bring all that together? How are you leveraging a CRM within your business?
Yeah, so our CRM is a work in progress. The CRM that we have today was not originally built for the wealth business. So we're kind of building it as we go here. I think getting back to my original comment on that, the Swiss Army knife approach in some markets, and then the more organized, shall we say, siloed, constructed US market approach has caused difficulties for my CRM team because they want to build it out one way or the other. So there's practically kind of a there's a technology aspect to this that I have made life more complicated because folks don't all have the same roles in every market, and some folks have multiple hats, and that's a challenge. I think we also have the issue around data and access to good data in various markets. Obviously in the US, you can get great data packs from a wirehouse. You can, there are great folks that you can partner with, like Dakota, in terms of kind of really kind of getting into the weeds. When you get outside of the US, it's a little more complicated. There are also some restrictions and privacy rules in various markets. So it's complicated is the straightforward answer. But I think we as a firm are spending an awful lot of time and money on this. But I think my whole career, salespeople have never been happy with CRMs, right? Like there's lots of things that salespeople, we love to get around and we're great like at complaining about and venting about and the CRM is always one of those things that we can always agree that we're always, oh, it's terrible. Yeah. The reality is, for those of us that have been in the business a while, the CRMs that we're dealing with today are fantastic in comparison to 5, 10, 15 years ago. So I look at the notes function in terms of people can now talk their I only saw this recently. I'm sure it's been around a really long time, but folks talking their notes in and then it going into the CRM for them. And just the efficiency of that, I was like, that's fantastic. I would have loved to have had that back in the day. Right. I do think if you're going to be involved in the development of a CRM, though, you have to have actually had the jobs out in the field. The one frustration I've always had is going into a room full of folks that are working on your CRM and nobody in the room has had the actual job that they're trying to solve for or help make more efficient. So that's something that's been a head scratcher for me multiple times through my career.
Yeah, we could not agree more. This is why we created our systems, our CRM, going back to the early days of Dakota with that in mind, right? It's not about just the reporting aspect of it and being able to report out based off of what you put in. It's about making you more efficient. It's about making you better at your job. It's about you ultimately then becoming more successful, which equates to a happier and wealthier time in your position.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Your leadership style, I'm getting a very clear sense of it, very high touch, very personal. Love that about your approach within a very large organization.
I don't know if the team loves that, but okay.
Talk to me about what else would you say over your years being very successful and getting to where you are here at Carlyle. What else have you learned along the way that influences your leadership style?
I mentioned earlier that throughout my career, I had the opportunity to work with some really great folks, and you have to love this business because it is a grind. It is really, really hard, and I think I fully appreciate everyone and all their efforts. Whether you're banging out calls on a sales desk or you're trying to get materials out, or you're trying to get something approved by compliance on a Friday afternoon for somebody, and you're dealing with all the complexities around that. I fully understand how all of that works, and I think it's because I've sat in all those seats. I think as well, I've also observed great bosses over the years, and I think the mistake some people can make, though, is they try to imitate or replicate a perceived successful boss and go, well, if I do exactly like that person does, if I do that, if I just copy them, then I will be a version of that and I will be as successful as them. I think you quickly realize that you want to take the best parts of all the folks that you admire in the business and then figure out a way to incorporate that into your style. Because I think ultimately you can't be authentic if it's not you. And the one thing I have learned when you're in front of clients, both on the wealth side and on the institutional side, they immediately smell it if you're not being real. And when you're in those face-to-face meetings, you have to come across as the person you are. And the minute you're trying to play the role of somebody you want to be or you think you should be, you're going to fail and you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, it's not going to work in those meetings. I mean, everyone that we're talking to, whether it be your team or talking to somebody that potentially could be allocating to a strategy, you're competing against a lot of talented people out there. You are having to separate yourself in a very short period of time. And if it doesn't connect right away, you've lost your audience.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Look, I'm incredibly fortunate with Carlyle. It's a great firm. The founders are great people. The senior leadership team under Harvey Schwartz is fantastic. I love coming to work every day. That hasn't always been the case throughout my career. I'm 25, 26 years in the business. There are highs and lows to this business. I think we all have to be honest about that. I think it comes across when you're enjoying your job, when you're enjoying what you do, and I certainly am today, that comes across. And with that, you will have success because clients as well enjoy being around people that love the firm that they're working at. And if you don't love where you're working, you should move on. You should go somewhere else because you're not going to be successful otherwise.
That is such a great point, Shane. And a good segue into the next question that I wanted to ask. We have a lot of young people that listen to these Rainmaker podcasts, learning from great leaders like yourself. What advice would you have for a young person looking to crack into our industry?
Yeah, I think people overcomplicate all of this. I think they overthink it. We've got some really smart interns, and we have a new analyst class that's just started. We've started a new analyst program within the IR function at Carlyle this year. And we had 13 folks just join us in July, right out of college, right? And it's fascinating to watch them. And they're a great group, incredibly, much smarter than I am. And I know they're all going to go on to have really great careers. That being said, I think at times the reality for all of us in this business is if you get to the table, you're smart, you deserve to be there, you understand the product, you should have a certain level of presentation skills, you should understand how to use the CRM, you should have done your homework on who the client is. All of that stuff, I think, is table stakes. I think the one area that I would tell folks to focus on right now is your work ethic. I firmly believe that the one thing I will always do is I'll always outwork you. So, and what I mean by that is very practically, if you're sitting out there in Cubeland and you're amongst 10 other analysts and you're trying to figure out how do you distinguish yourself from what is a cohort where you're all very, it's hard. If you're sitting in my seat, it's hard for me to sometimes tell everyone apart, and it's difficult. But you know what? If you work that extra hour every day, you stay back an extra hour every day, that's 5 hours a week. You start to add that up over the course of the month, over the course of the year. And I'm telling you, those at-bats really start to distinguish you and pull you away from the pack ultimately. Mm-hmm. Nothing beats hard work in this business. Nothing beats, kind of spending the time. If you're on a sales desk, make more calls than everyone else. Activity trumps everything in this business. And if you're out in the field, do more meetings than everyone else. Now, yes, they should be smart. They should be informed. You should be meeting the right folks because you should be utilizing the right data with the right CRM and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, you can outwork the others. For some reason, I think right now, people lose that as they kind of think about all the other stuff.
You struck on really two key points. I hope everybody listening, that it's driven home to them, right? The first point around work ethic, working late, getting there early, right? I mean, those are the things that I remember early in my career. You did that, right? You wanted to be there before your boss, and you certainly were going to leave after your boss. And you do separate yourself that way. It creates great habits. But that also means be in person. I mean, I know the hybrid work model is still very prevalent today. I had the privilege of sitting where you're sitting right now, doing a Rainmaker podcast, and that was my advice: is get back in the office. This is a mentorship business, and if you're in those offices having the conversation, you can't replicate that being in your house or your apartment over Zoom.
No.
Be in person, work hard. I love that. But also that aspect of activity, because that is the lifeblood of what we do.
Yeah.
Establishing relationships, creating new relationships, and that is all predicated upon your level of activity. Shane, those are great points of advice I hope everybody takes very seriously.
Can I actually follow up? There's one, when you talk about folks then out in the field and I have found, and you'll do the formal meeting, you'll go in, you'll present in whatever context, whatever you're trying to get out into the market. And it's usually the walk back to the elevator bank, or if they're walking you out to your car, whatever, it's at that point in the conversation, right, in that meeting, where the relationship changes. A lot of the time, or it's ahead of time, they're telling you something about what they did this past weekend with their family or whatever, and all of a sudden you make a personal connection. Those things don't happen on Zoom.
Correct.
They just don't. So yeah, I do think that in person, and it's the same for folks that are looking for mentors, they're looking for, get back into the office, because you could be really fortunate and bump into someone on the elevator or in the kitchen in the morning grabbing a coffee. And that's where you could have that 5-minute conversation that months and months from now, that person in senior leadership could be in a meeting. It might be like, something, he or she that person is perfect for this role. I'm going to grab that. I've done that multiple times through my career, where I've taken folks that I've randomly met in the organization and pulled them into different roles. And it really works.
It really works. That's really powerful. It's great advice. Shane, I also wanted to ask you about challenges right now. We face a lot. There's always a lot of volatility. There's always a lot of headlines. But even as you think about now approaching the wealth channels, what are some of those challenges that you're facing on a day-to-day basis?
So it's slightly different for us on the private market side. If we'll kind of take the US and then maybe the global, I'll kind of separate the two here. I'll call it US and international. On the US side, the story is one of advisors, clients are anywhere from 2 to 4% allocated to alts, broadly speaking. And if you're talking to any of the home office folks, the goal is to get that up to 8 to 10%. Now, I'll caveat it in saying some of the large private banks may already be north of 10%. They're, kind of put them off in a different category. But for the mass affluent, they're in that 2 to 4% for the most part. So the effort there is around education and things like this, doing video content, getting stuff out to folks in a very digestible, under 5 minutes format, like what is direct lending, what are the benefits of private equity? Those kind of things really, really help. And our distribution partners are asking us to help them with that. So I think there's that education component, but then there's also, you have to have the physical number of folks in order to do that. I feel like I'm a full-time recruiter and a part-time Carlyle employee right now. And we continue to build out our US distribution sales team. And ultimately, when I'm talking with the heads of various private banks and various wealth platforms in the US, the first thing they go to is your org chart. They want to see, because at the end of the day, you can have a great product, a great fund, a great investment strategy. But if you don't have enough folks that can get out there and help advisors and help them tell that story to end clients, you're probably not going to be that successful. So I think size and scale is a big challenge for folks in this business today in the US market. Ex-US, it's a slightly different effort because it's not as mature as we are here. So it's anywhere from 1 to 2%, more or less. There are, of course, pockets that are very different, like a Zurich or a Singapore, which are probably north of 10, 15%. There, it's more about getting them comfortable with evergreen structures, getting them comfortable with the concept of semi-liquid, to an extent in the US still as well. So I think it's more around fund structures, and it's more around telling the broader story around private markets. The US market's much more mature. It's still 70+% of flows from a private wealth perspective. That will change in the coming years. It'll probably come down to 55, 60%. And I think the primary drivers, I think Japan's a very interesting place to be today. South Korea is interesting. And then I think the Middle East and Europe are evolving. The European market is going to be less fragmented than it is today because of various regime changes. I feel like I've been saying that for many years now, but I really do feel that we're starting to get there.
I mean, it's fascinating how you have to keep track of all the various markets, what's driving those markets, demographics play a role in that, and just all the various buying behaviors of those different markets, and you have to support all of it. So it's great that you have such a phenomenal opportunity set in front of you, Shane. Before we conclude this podcast, any other advice that you want to share? And I'm thinking about more for others in a similar role to yours in that leadership position, anything you would want to share with them? Because I love listening to these podcasts as well. I learn a lot from them. So what would you have as advice for a person in more of a senior leadership role for a sales and marketing position?
Yeah. So years and years ago, back to the very start of this conversation, my career began at Merrill Lynch, right? And there were a couple of key folks in the early days, David Rondeau, Jack McDonald, who hopefully listen to this podcast. And they would both agree on one thing. And it was like, make sure you're the dumbest person in the room. So when you put your leadership team around you, put lots of really smart, quality individuals around you that are all subject matter experts. And I think as long as you're doing that, and as long as you're being challenged by the team around you, they're going to really bring you along on the journey ultimately. So I would say your immediate senior leadership team, make sure all of those folks are smarter than you, which my team would say they absolutely are. So maybe I've hired well, or I'm really that dumb. I'm not sure which it is.
But it's a great challenge that you're putting out there for the people that work for you, though. Be that subject matter expert. I know you have a lot of great resources at Carlyle that you can bring into the conversation to support the due diligence of whomever it is that you're talking to. But take pride in what you bring into that meeting. And it sounds like you've selected a great team to surround yourself with who do take that quite seriously.
And I would say, look, private market firms historically have been really great on the institutional side, and they're coming up the curve on the wealth side. And different firms are at different points in that journey today. And what I would say to my colleagues on the traditional asset management side, there's an awful lot of learning that you can bring to firms like mine. So don't discount that. You have a lot to offer firms like Carlyle, because the learning curve is steep, as we all know, and it's hard, and it's a grind on the wealth side. So surround yourself with good folks that know how this business works, and you'll be successful.
Shane, we cannot thank you enough for all the thoughts that you have shared on this podcast with us, with our members, with our audience, taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot on your plate. I didn't mean to throw that out there as a way to have you worry. But it's fantastic. I mean, having that growth mindset in a well-established, a phenomenal brand in Carlyle. Congratulations on the position. And all the great growth that I'm sure is ahead for you and for your team and for Carlyle. We are so thrilled and so grateful that you're able to join us here in the studio, and anything that we can do to help out your endeavors is available to you. So thank you so much, Shane.
Absolutely. Thank you. I had a blast today. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for listening.
You can find this episode and others on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. We are also available on YouTube if you prefer to watch while you listen. If you would like to check up on past episodes, check out our website, dakota.com. Finally, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, please be sure to like, follow, and share these episodes. We welcome all your feedback as well. Thank you for investing your time with Dakota.
Hey, thanks so much for joining Rainmaker Podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show, enjoyed the interview. I know I loved it. And hey, if you wake up in the morning and you raise money for an investment firm, you do cold outreach, whether you're a sales leader or salesperson, and you don't know about Dakota Marketplace, we would love to show it to you. It's world-class. It's used by over 880 investment firms and over 3,600 individual salespeople. To learn more, go to dakota.com and click on a free trial.